The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Maciek and it's so good to see you here, guys. So first of all, before we even begin with the entire webinar, I just wanted to ask you a typical question. Can you hear me? Now, in order to answer this question, you have to use the question box in the panel that you see on your screens, and basically you can just type in your answer over there. So just please type in right now if you can hear me. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so this question box is not just for you to answer this question, but basically also to comment on what you see in front of you, to ask some other questions, or in fact to answer some questions I'm going to have along the way. So this question box is our way of communicating with each other. So one more time, thanks a lot for coming. My name is Maciek, and there we go. So today's webinar, in fact, is, well, the next episode of the series entitled Bits and Bobs, but this time I decided to take you a little bit by surprise and show you some different things. I mean, it's not going to be about grammar or, vocabulary specifically. It's going to be about something that you see in the background of this slide. So based on what you see in the picture here, can you guess what the subject of today's webinar is going to be? Use the question box to type in your answer, please. Just take a good look at, what you see in the background, what kind of things these are, and based on this, make a guess what the subject of today's webinar is going to be. All right, about taking photos. Well, yeah, definitely this is going to be one of the things that we're going to talk about. In fact, it's going to be a little bit broader in scope. It's about photography. Now, you may ask, why photography? Well, because we live in times when everyone has a camera. At least everybody has a smartphone, and a smartphone comes with a camera. So basically, whether you like it or not, you have a camera with you if you have a phone, even if it's not a smartphone itself. So just a question, kind of like, to see how many of you take pictures. And, well, with a smartphone or other type of camera as well. Use the question box and just type in I do that to see how many of you take pictures. All right. A lot of you, in fact, take pictures with your phones. I mean, sometimes it's a photo of a document. Sometimes it's a picture that you take in the street. You use smartphones. I see a lot of answers coming up, and well, I guess it would be very difficult to find a person who doesn't use the camera in the smartphone or any other type of camera, in fact. And that's why the subject of today's webinar is about photography, because it might be quite interesting to learn vocabulary associated with what you do. So guys, we live in times when phone cameras are sometimes up to par with DSLRs. Now, the first thing I want to show you is this word up to par, basically. Now, have something like this, that something is up to par with something, and if so, you might want to type in your suggestion in the question box. Let's see if if this is understandable. If not, I'm going to give you the answer in a moment. But this expression that phone cameras is sometimes up to par with DSLRs is something that we're going to start off with. Now, up to par means that something is just as good as, can compete with something. So phone cameras are like that. Now, DSLR is well, the English equivalent of the word that we know as lustrzanka, which I guess most of you are familiar with. So let's move on then. And I've already mentioned that sometimes, phones are up to par with DSLRs, but it's not always the case. If you take a look at this picture in particular, you can see that the subject, that this lady in the picture, is pretty sharp, but the background of this picture is not. I guess these are some kind of somewhere there in the distance, but you can't see them actually. What you see are kind of like shiny balls of light back there. So do you know the name of this effect in the background when you have this type of an image with the sharp subject and this kind of background where you can't see things really well. And this is one of the things which smartphones cannot do. Or when they do it, it's not always the effect that you want to achieve. So basically this in the background is the so-called bokeh. Well, people normally say that this is kind of like blurry background or blur in the background, but if you want to use a more photographic word, bokeh is the word that you're looking for. So basically some photos, sometimes when you take a picture of something which is very close to the lens of your phone, you might see that, it's kind of like has this nice blur. So this is, sometimes achievable on phones, but most of the time if you want to take a picture like that with bokeh in the background, you use a different type of a camera, not your phone. So this is a kind of introduction to the entire webinar today, and what we'll be looking at is gear, technique, composition, and a little bit of editing. So basically it's not the order in which the things are gonna appear here in the webinar, but it's these are the subjects that we will be taking a look at. So let's start with the basics. In Polish you say zrobić zdjęcie. Now the question is over to you guys. What do you say in English? So what word is missing here? And please use the question box to type in your suggestions. All right. Take a photo. Very good. Very good. This is actually what you do with a photo. You take it, but it's not the only option. There are a couple of other things that you can use here in the place of take. So can you think of anything else that you can put here rather than take? Just, it could be even a blind guess. You don't have to worry too much because I'm going to show you these options in a moment. All right, I see some options coming up already, like make a shot or take a shot as well. That's right. Okay, now if we want to stick to this as close to this phrase that we have here, you can also snap a photo, which basically refers to the same thing. It just indicates that a photo is taken rather quickly without much preparation. You see something, you take out your smartphone or your camera and you just snap a photo. And this is it. It's the same. Now, photographers, however, when they hear about taking photos, snapping of photos, they kind of like they don't like it. What they like saying is that you don't take a photo, you make a photo, because it indicates that the process requires something more than just taking out a camera and then snapping a picture or taking a picture. Making a photo, you just have to think about all different aspects of composition, of settings, or location, timing, etc. So photographers say you don't take a photo, you make a photo. And this is nice to know because I just throughout the course of this webinar, I'll be trying to show you that making a photo is actually the thing, that you're making a photo rather than just taking it. So before we go any further, let's just take a look at this example. Now, this slide shows you a picture, and can you think of a name which can be used to describe a photograph like that? Kind of like, take just kind of like a selfie. Is there a word that comes to your mind just to describe a photograph like that? A single word. In fact, we've already taken a look at something which might be very useful a couple of moments before when we were looking at different phrases about taking a photo. All right, it's actually a shot. Now, in fact, a word describing a picture like that, very informal, taken very quickly, is a snapshot. You just take a snapshot, and basically, this is not a photo that you make. There is this aspect with all those preparations and everything is absent. You just take a camera and bam, you take a photo, you snap a photo. And this is a definition from a dictionary: a casual photo made typically by an amateur with a small handheld camera. I guess, right now, the final phrase, a small handheld camera, can be easily replaced with the word smartphone because that's the thing that we normally use to take snapshots. Now, this picture is different. Now, a photographer, I think, would describe this picture as a photograph. And again, as you see, this picture is different because it requires you to set your camera right, to find the right location, to wait for the moment when you see those sun rays coming from behind the trees, etc. So this is a photograph that you have to make. Not just, it's not a snapshot, it's a photograph. So basically, as you see, even though these words are synonymous, and you can use the word snapshot or a photo or a photograph, especially when you're talking to a photographer, they might have different images in their minds. This is a photograph, and the previous example was more of a snapshot. And here, it's a definition again from a dictionary of a photograph. And as you can see, it's much longer and much more detailed and much more technical, but we are not going to take a look at it. Just remember that photograph is kind of like, there is this creative process and planning and everything involved in it. Now, since we use smartphones most of the time, let's think of some limitations that we have with smartphones. So I would like you now to think of a situation in which you had a smartphone and you wanted to take a picture of something, but your smartphone was not enough. You needed something else to take a good picture. Can you think of a situation like this? What was missing in the smartphone to take a photo? Let me take a look at your suggestions, guys. Maybe you were too far away. Maybe you were, you had to hold your... All right, Zoom, for example. Absolutely. Zoom is definitely one of those things that smartphones do not have. And even if they do, most of the time it's the so-called digital zoom. I bet that, it happens to you all the time. You're standing far away from somewhere and then you want to zoom, and what you see are those strange pixels. The quality of the image suddenly is terrible, and you don't really want to take a picture like this. So zoom is one of those things. Anything else that's the smartphone did not have in a situation from the past that you needed to take a good photo? All right. Well, it would be difficult to come up with such examples because you usually want to forget such moments. Like I don't want to come back, to that moment ever again. It's like a flash. All right, a flash. That's right. A flash is kind of like small-ish in smartphones. There is a flash, but sometimes it doesn't do the job. All right. One of the things that your smartphones do not have, or at least the application for taking photos in your smartphones doesn't have, is the ability to choose between different modes. Most of the time, you don't have this dial thing. You cannot just select, I want to do this, I want to do that. So this dial is missing. Now, the word dial itself in the Polish language would be something like a pokrętło. So there is nothing like that in smartphones. Now, your smartphones usually use the auto mode, and you cannot choose this mode, the M mode. Now the question over to you guys, what does this M mode stand for? Do you know? You have auto mode, the green thing, and M, what is it? Absolutely. That's the manual mode, as well all of you seem to know already, which is very good. But the thing is that, in auto mode, the camera takes control of itself, basically. Now, the question is, what does the camera set in auto mode itself? There are, in fact, a couple of things that the camera takes care of. Now, do you know what things are set for you in the auto mode that you don't have any control of? Use the question box to type in your suggestions. Maybe you already know the things that the camera takes care of. There are 3 things I can tell you at this point that your camera sets itself in auto mode and doesn't allow you to change anything. Do you know what this is? Alright, I see some of you already know a couple of things about taking photos. Shutter is one of those things. Very good. Shutter speed, to be more precise, is something that you cannot control in auto mode. Okay, this might be a little bit tricky, guys, so let's just jump into the first slide. Things apart from the shutter, as one of you mentioned, is ISO or ISO. Some people say ISO, some say ISO. Some photographers are really confused about which pronunciation to use. I go with ISO and it's perfectly okay. So what is this in the first place? Any ideas about what ISO is? What does it set? Any ideas? I know it might be quite difficult just to come up with a quick definition of what this is, but just think about it. Is it light? Is it maybe sensitivity? Maybe sensitivity. Yes, in fact, it is the sensitivity of the image sensor. Like every camera has an image sensor in it. Ah, very good. Kind of sensitivity. Very good. So basically, every camera has the image sensor, every digital camera has the image sensor, which has to react to how much light is around. So if you have a lot of light around you, you can select like low ISO value. If you want to take a picture in a dark environment, you need high ISO values because you want to make your image sensor very sensitive to light. So this is what happens. If ISO is just very, very high, you can see that the image sometimes has this noise, this grain. Sometimes the quality might not be very good, but it will take a picture in a very dark environment. So I mentioned three things. So the second one of them is shutter speed. One of you, in fact, mentioned shutter speed. And by the way, coming back to ISO, in Polish, it's exactly the same. You just say ISO, and this is it. Now, shutter speed. Let's try to guess what this is. So again, if you were to guess what setting this allows you to change, or what setting this sets, what would that be? Shutter speed. All right, very good. Somebody mentioned with a smile that this is a time for which the przesłona is open, and it's a very good definition, in fact, because shutter translates to Polish as przesłona. So, well, I mean, not as migawka. Sorry, that's my mistake. It's a migawka thing. So, but yeah, it's kind of like it closes very quickly. So shutter speed allows you to control how quickly you want the shutter to open, like bam, bam. So, if you want to allow a lot of light in your camera, you just open it for a long time. And if you want just, a millisecond, like just a fraction of a second for it to open, you just select very, very high value, like 1/3000th of a second, basically. So shutter speed is prędkość migawki. Now this thing here is something that already in the definition. So what is this thing, guys? What does the aperture actually do? All right. So some of you guys actually mentioned szczelina, which is a very good direction in which you have to go, because aperture is actually the opening. So if you look at a lens, and in a moment we'll just have a picture representing all of these values. It's basically the opening in a photographic lens that lets the light in. So if you have like very low value, like it's an aperture is represented by the letter F. So if you have like very low value, it means that the aperture is very, very wide. It allows you to let a lot of light in, and basically you can take pictures with that nice blur in the background effect. Do you remember the name for the blur in the background, by the way, guys? You might want to come back, just to that one of the first slides, because this, yeah, very good. It's bokeh. So aperture allows you to create this bokeh effect in the background. The lower the value of the f-stop, basically the more background the more blur in the background you have. So the nicer blur, the lower the f number. Now this is actually what smartphone manufacturers use quite often to differentiate between between the cameras. If they want to say that they have a very good camera in the phone, it's not so much about megapixels, which are not that important really. But right now, if you take a look at the specifications of a phone, and if you want to buy a new phone, just take a look at what they put in the F number. If the number is pretty low, it means that the camera in the smartphone will perform pretty good in low light conditions. You get pictures at night with those nice lights, etc. So this is what phone manufacturers very often try to draw your attention to. We have the camera with a very low f number. with very low aperture value. All right, now those three things that we've already mentioned, which is ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, all of them combined together create exposure. So do you know the Polish term for this word, exposure? It might be pretty easy because it sounds almost exactly the same as the English term. That's right, it's expozycja. This is exactly this, so exposure is directly controlled by these three things. So shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. And auto mode, in fact, takes care of the exposure of the photo by setting different parameters correctly based on how much light there is around you. And you can easily also see what aperture looks like because this, at the bottom of this triangle, it shows a picture of a kind of like, what aperture looks like inside a lens. And you see that this f for 2.8 allows a lot of light in, and f22 allows, doesn't let too much light into the camera, into the sensor. So this is how it works. So the lower the number, the more light you allow into your camera. Now, what can go wrong with the exposure? Take a look at this picture. Now, if you were kind of like just, to say immediately what's wrong with this, what would you say? What's wrong with that picture, guys? Does it, is everything visible? Yeah, absolutely. It's too dark. That's right. You just can't see everything, right? Because it's very dark. This is what happens when, for example, your ISO value is just too low, or maybe your aperture number is too high, or maybe, your shutter speed is just too quick, basically. So three factors which you might want to consider. Yes, I guess it's Venice. Doesn't seem to be any other place. Indeed, I didn't take that picture. I just found it somewhere. Just looking for this kind of picture. Now I was looking for this kind of picture to show you how to call this, or what word to use. It's basically underexposed. It means that the picture is too dark, underexposed, and basically not enough light was allowed into the camera. Now, some of those areas which are pretty dark might actually turn black in the final image that you're taking. And if they're just black, nothing can be done about the picture because you don't have any details there. It's just black. So what happens, the name of that thing when you just have black spots in the picture is that you have clipped shadows. Now, shadows, quite understandable. These are, those dark areas, shadows. Now, clipping, like literally, it means cutting off. You have nail clippers, which is, this little thing that you use to cut your nails off when they grow too long. So if you clip shadows, or if you cut shadows off entirely, basically, effectively, those dark areas are just black and you cannot do anything with it. So this is what you want to avoid. So underexposed images might just have clipped shadows. Now, with this picture, I think it will be a little bit easier. The question is, what is wrong with that one in contrast to the previous one? You might want to have you might want to try to use the word, very good. Very good. I see some of you are already using the right word. Too much light, too bright, and overexposed. Absolutely. So this is how it works. The prefix works exactly the same as with any other word. So underexposed means that there is just too little of something, in this case too little light. Overexposed, as is the case with this picture, is when there is just too much light. So maybe your ISO value was just too high. Maybe your aperture was just open too wide, or maybe your shutter was open for too long. Anything can go wrong, basically, but this is what auto mode takes care of. So overexposed picture is too bright. Now, those areas which are very, very bright are called highlights, and they might end up just being white. And again, as was the case with underexposed picture, these areas may be completely black. Here they may be completely white and there are no details in them. You just cannot do anything with those white spots. It sometimes happens, I guess you might have experienced something like that when you take a picture of sky, and you want to take a picture of a person and there is the sky, very nice clouds, and you use your phone and then you take a picture and the person is very bright and the sky is just white. You just can't see anything there. Well, this is what happens when basically the sky is overexposed. And I guess that this image represents a challenge that maybe most of you have already had when you have this nice view through the window and you ask somebody to stand in front of the window to take a picture of that person, and it suddenly turns out that, well, something goes wrong. Either the window is totally white, so it's overexposed, or the person is almost totally black, which basically means underexposed. And you kind of like try to change settings and nothing works because it's either this or that. Has anything like that happened to some of you guys? Yes, no? Have you ever had a challenge like this? Like, what's going on? I just can't take a picture with the person and the view through the window. Right. Yeah, I know. It's sometimes frustrating. This happens when you have the so-called backlit subject. Yeah, and some of you say you should use lamp or you should use flash. Absolutely. So in such situations, you've got backlit subject, which means that a lot of light is coming from the back of the subject of the photo, so the person or the thing that you want to take a picture of. Now, this results in the fact that if you want to preserve view through the window, you end up with the person's silhouette. So you kind of like the person is almost entirely black. You can just see the outlines of the person. Now, if you use flash in such a situation, the problem is that the flash might be reflected from the window behind the person, and then you end up with this kind of spot, which is not exactly what you want to have in your photo. So this is when manual mode, in fact, comes in handy, because you can just create a balanced image, not entirely balanced, which I'm going to tell you in a moment, but basically you might want to work this out and then later on edit the picture to make it look as you would like it to look. Now, the problem with cameras is that they do not function the same way as human eye, because what you need to do is you have to select the area where you set your exposure. So if you want to make sure that the view is visible, your camera will be looking at this section of the picture. If you want to make sure the person in front of the window is visible, your camera will be looking at this section of the picture. So you just have to compromise which thing you want to have exposed, or later on in editing you should know that this is something that you will have to correct. In most cases, the second option is the truth. So do not be frustrated in situations like this, because this is normal. Cameras do not work like human eyes. It's just a piece of equipment which you need to know how to cope with. Now, as I mentioned, guys, editing is something which can make your lives easier when you have pictures which you want to improve a little bit. And yeah, flash makes it sometimes creates the effect of red eyes. All right, so editing software. How many of you guys actually edit the pictures that you take? I'm not thinking of like professional editing, but just maybe a little bit of color correction, maybe putting some nice filter on it. So do you do that, guys? All right. So yeah, cards. All right. I see some of the things might come in handy then, guys. But because some of the options are available in the app. In the app that comes with your phones, and I'm going to show you later on some other apps which you might want to try out to experiment with editing photos. So one of the things that you can do is to tweak a photo a little bit, and that tweaking is actually the thing that you might want to memorize. That if you tweak something, you just improve it. Now, basically, such editing software allows you to look at different parameters and then experiment with different slides you can change exposure, you can change contrast, you can focus on highlights, shadows, and now you know what these sliders do. So when you go to highlights, you can expect that those bright areas will become a little bit darker or maybe become a little bit brighter, depending on what you want to achieve. In shadow, when shadows are just too dark, you may want to just increase the value a little bit, and then suddenly it turns out that there are some details in the shadows, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look at a couple of things that I've pre-selected for you. So here, guys, the F number indicates aperture, right? You've got 1/20th of a second, which basically indicates what? 1/20th of a second? What is it? It's right here in front of you, guys. It's the shutter speed. Absolutely. So as you see, based on such information, you know what you can experiment with, etc. You can also take a look at highlights, shadows, as I mentioned. Now, clarity. When you see a slider like this, clarity, what can you expect? Think of an adjective which comes from the word clarity. You might want to type this into the question box. What's the adjective of clarity? What do you think? Clarity, and then the adjective would be, it's a little exercise in word formation. Absolutely. I see some of you are typing in the answers. It's clear. So clarity is a noun from the adjective clear. So if you want to make your picture a little bit clearer, sometimes there might be some fog, so there might be some haze, some things might be very distant, and basically if you want to make the picture a little bit clearer, you add clarity to the image. All right. Now, another thing you can do, and some of you have already mentioned that, but used a different word, you can actually crop a picture. So what does cropping do? Cropping a picture, what is it? If you were to use any other word to describe this, cropping is what? Absolutely. It's like cutting. You change size by cutting off certain parts of the picture that you don't want them to be there. All right. Now, as you see, there's those red lines there, and these lines, I guess, are the standard view on any phone that you have. Sometimes some people just get rid of it very quickly, but these lines are pretty important, especially when it comes to cropping pictures, or even earlier when you take a picture and you know what these lines are for. Now, these lines represent the so-called rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a rule which tells you which sections of the image will be most visible, or to which sections of the image your viewer's eye will be attracted to in the first place. So when these lines meet, basically, like close to the letter R, close to the letter E right here, close to the letter T, and close to the letter S, these are the most natural points in the image where the eye of the person is going to go. So the rule is that you make sure that this section of the image which you want the viewer to draw their attention to should be somewhere close to where those three lines meet. So when you're cropping your image, you don't put the subject like dead in the dead center of the image. You might want to put it a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, just to make sure that it's close to these lines, because that's where human eye naturally goes. All right, so this is it. Now, let's take a look at photo gear for a moment. Now, gear is another word for what, guys? What do you think? If you were to use any other term, a synonym to this word, what would that be? Gear, what is it? All right, I see some of the answers coming up, but might be very tricky. Yeah, it's like any kind of equipment. It doesn't have to be like, photo equipment. It could be any equipment, but in the world of photography, the word gear is very often used in, sentences like this. What gear do you use? And by this, photographers mean, photo equipment, basically. So the word gear refers to the equipment that you're using to take your photos. Now, since we're talking about gear, let's try to answer this question. What camera is the best? What do you think? is the best? What kind of camera is the best type of camera? The ones used by professionals. All right, could be. They're very expensive ones, especially the lenses. But yeah, very good ones. All right. Now there is no good answer to this question. However, there is one answer that every photographer is going to give you, and this is the one that you have on you. So it doesn't really matter what camera you have at home, etc., what camera you would like to have. If you know how to use the camera that you have, like and you can take a picture with it right away, it's the best camera that you have. So for most of us, these are smartphones really, because we just have them with us all the time and we can take pictures whenever we wish to take them. Now, since we've already mentioned gear, let's try to name this type of camera. In fact, this appeared, well, at the very beginning almost of this presentation. Absolutely, it's a DSLR. Very good, guys. Now, DSLR actually stands for digital single reflex lens, which you don't really need to use because this abbreviation DSLR is exactly what you need if you want to refer to a lustrzanka. So DSLR in plural, you just add S at the end. So many DSLRs are available here in this store. So DSLR, this is what you need to remember. And it has lens which comes off basically, so you can just change lens here. Now, what is this type of camera? What do you think? What would you call this type of camera? It's a funny one. It's not very big. It has everything. You don't really need to attach any lens to it. It's like one piece, and this one is actually more special. This is the so-called compact camera, guys. If something is compact, it's kind of like small. It has everything in it. You don't need any accessories for it because basically it is what it is in just one piece. And this one is also an instant camera. It's a film camera basically. You might want to go to a store and look for an Instax, and you will see that what you need to buy is this funny looking film which you put inside, and those pictures are in paper, like instantly printed out. So a compact camera, and in this particular case it's an instant camera. And what is this? Surprise, surprise. That's right, it's a mobile phone or a smartphone. That's right. That's right. Most of the time the word smartphone will do, and smartphone camera, phone camera, everything will just do the job. But smartphone and what camera to use? I use a smartphone is a valid answer. Now, this is going to be one of the last things I want to show you today, guys. I wanted to show you a couple of applications which you might want to install to check out some of the things we've been talking about in today's webinar. So I do encourage you to experiment with the photos, with taking photos and then editing them. And you might want to have a look at such apps as Lightroom, for example. Some of these are actually paid. I can't remember. I think Lightroom is a paid application, and it offers you kind of like lots of possibilities. From the moment when you take a photo, you can select a format in which you take the photo. Then you can just experiment with different filters, changing highlights, and then changing shadows, adding to the pictures, etc. So basically it's a really nice, like, professional even application just for you guys to experiment. Another one I think is worth trying. It's totally free. It's Visco. It's there's VSCO, you pronounce it Visco, and what it does, it allows you also to control your camera in the phone, just experimenting with ISO, with shutter speed, with aperture and things like that. And then you can use different filters, and also just apart from cropping the images, you might want to add some colors and well, experiment with shadows, highlights, etc. So these are very nice things that you might want to try out. In Light, I think there is a new version of this application right now. I think it's called something like InLight Fox or something. But basically, this application allows you to play around with the photos you've already taken. So you might want to cut out a section You can put it in another picture and then just, change colors and make it look like it's taken from a comic book or something. It's really nice, software just to play around with. It has a lot of tutorials, and you might want to just see how cool it is to play around with the pictures you've already taken, because you might just put a new life into them. Now, the other applications, such as over, tangent, legend as well. Legend is for making animations with the pictures, but over and tangent are actually for adding some cool like geometric effects. Over is like allows you to put different layers on top of your images. So you might want to add some other images, some text, etc. It's really, really cool. So these are applications I wanted to show you guys. The application WMU is actually for Nikon users who want to control the camera with the phone, which is possible. And well, the other ones I want to try as well, but they're taking videos and then playing around with videos. So I hope that after today's webinar, you will definitely be much more aware of all these words associated with taking pictures. What ISO stands for, what shutter speed is, what exposure is, what can go wrong with the exposure. That something is underexposed, overexposed. What happens to shadows? What to do if you have a backlit subject and things like these, because well, maybe at a certain point in your lives it will prove pretty useful. So this is it for me, guys, for today. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope the next thing you're going to do is just to go to some app stores or Play Store and look for some applications to experiment with your photos, and pay attention to the language used there as well, because it's pretty interesting and well different from what you have usually in everyday life. So thank you very much. Thanks for your attendance, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Bye bye.